Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for what is going to be a very interesting discussion about global mobility. We're increasing the focus. There was a panel yesterday talking about global mobility, and that was really focused on, I suppose, the complexity of it, tax and immigration, and we'll certainly discuss that today. But I think, when we're talking about global mobility and the teams in global mobility within sort of the in-house environment, it's quite fascinating because when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden the teams that had the expertise in visas and immigration and insurance and traveling all of a sudden went from having an expat population or a business traveler population into the entire workforce as their population, and talk about how quickly you can ramp up teams to do that. And I think there's a lot of challenges there. I'd like to thank Tony from Gerson Relocation. Gerson Relocation is a corporate mobility firm, and he put this panel together. So all of the good work from Tony, just want to sort of recognize that. Maybe if we just do a quick introduction to the panel, and we'll get into a few questions. Maybe we'll start with you, Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Zeeshan Khan, and I'm the HR Program Manager for the EMEA and APAC region at a company called Klaviyo. So we are a software provider for e-commerce businesses for marketing solutions.
Great, thank you. And Claire?
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Fielding. I'm the Global Mobility and Immigration Lead for GoCardless. We're a payment platform fintech. Looking forward to speaking with everyone today.
Great, thank you. And Kat?
Hi, Bryne Hussey. I am the Group Mobility Manager for Sky. I don't think I need to explain Sky.
Yes, that's Sky. Yes.
Yeah, that's Sky. I've been in the industry for about 15 years.
Great, thank you. And we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So first of all, in terms of we're talking about the Great Resignation, there's a lot of work around retaining current employees, but also helping the company to attract. So maybe if we start off with, how does the global mobility, how do your teams support that, whether it's on a retention perspective or helping your recruitment teams actually attract new people into your companies? What are you doing, and what changes have you seen maybe over the last sort of 18 months within your organizations? Maybe we start with Kat.
Sure. I think from Sky's perspective, we're in the battle with technology and that sector where talent is so tough to recruit for at the moment, and the ask of being more and more flexible in terms of supporting that reach of obtaining that talent is now global, and that headhunting process, and how we can then still facilitate that hiring along with potentially not relocating to that standard office space. Mm-hmm. And the compliance that we're being asked more and more about around how we facilitate that. Can we pay them in local currencies? How often do they need to travel to the UK? How often in the office? It all clashes and contradicts itself. And I think that level of flexibility and therefore the strain that is putting on mobility functions to support the business, but clash with the incredibly complex or growing complexity of compliance in tax, social security, immigration, employment law, everything that was talked about last night in one of the sessions. I think that type of relocation and type of support is new to the industry. Mm-hmm. It's not that long-term assignment where we're relocating a family and we pay for everything around it. That's where it's for me is definitely clashing. Okay,
so, it's interesting because I think with the pandemic has obviously accelerated the need for flexibility, and a lot of the policies and processes and the support that you had in place for a traditional expatriate sort of assignment or short-term assignments changed. But I know, Claire, you moved into your role probably about 6 months ago. It's a technology, it's fintech, it's one of the hot sectors. What are you seeing in your space?
I think for us, it's kind of, we're trying to figure it out as we go, to be honest with you. I think coming through the pandemic, people were working kind of wherever they landed, so there was a lot more kind of, it's COVID, let's just, if you're so-and-so location, just work from there, whereas now we're trying to rein that in a little bit. But I think with that, we are looking at some kind of broader solutions, so more kind of, we call them work away policies, so giving people up to a certain amount of time each year to work essentially wherever they want, with some caveats. And then around that also looking at some kind of more inventive solutions to hire in locations where we don't have offices. So happy to talk about it a bit more later, but we're working with an employer of record company, which I know is a kind of a bit of a hot area in terms of a solution at the moment. So we're kind of just entering that space to give us the ability to attract and hire talent where we don't necessarily have a physical office presence. So I think for us, we're quite a young company from a mobility standpoint, so we don't have to break any of the old barriers of having very structured secondments, for example. In that respect, we're quite flexible in what we do, but equally, we're in a very competitive market. What we hear a lot is, oh, well, I can get this at so-and-so company is offering me this, and that's a big challenge. So we're trying to keep up with market whilst making sure we're compliant. So I wish there was a perfect answer, and I wish there was a perfect solution, but we're just trying to figure it out as we go along.
I think that's the interesting one in terms of really what's real out there, right? Because everybody's having to move quite fast. Everybody's communicating benefits that maybe they can't necessarily deliver on, particularly hiring managers, looking for talent. So I wonder, Clavio, what are you seeing? Is there parallels there, or anything different that you're seeing?
No, I think this element around the talent market being very competitive is very true, especially in our industry, in the SaaS space particularly. There's a huge demand for talent, and there are lots of competitors who offer very competitive packages as well to employees. But I think the focus has shifted a lot from an employee's perspective around the culture of the company that they'd like to be a part of, and having that flexibility to work from everywhere. I'm sure everyone must have heard about Airbnb recently, who decided to open up the opportunities for their employees to work from anywhere in the world. And we're seeing a lot more businesses think in that direction. And definitely at our company, at Klaviyo, the conversation is certainly shifting more towards, okay, how do we offer maximum flexibility to our employees while driving and making sure we are building the infrastructure that can allow them to work from anywhere in the world, just so that we can tap into those specific regions and those specific areas where the talent is based, but we are not. So. It's definitely a journey, and I think I would certainly see that the SaaS industry will evolve in that direction, because that's how the employees are thinking, and that's what the talent actually wants in the market.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting. I think you mentioned about culture, so we've got the people side of things and that connection, which obviously we miss a lot in sort of lockdowns and those types of things. But also technology. You're working for technology companies. So I'm thinking, how does technology pre-pandemic and now, how does that help you do your work? And is there anything that's changed, right? Because now, from my assumption is that population that you're influencing and the types of policies you need to put in place, you need obviously technology to support, particularly with larger employee populations. I was wondering, what are you seeing in the technology space? And are there any wish lists in terms of these are the things that would really help from a global mobility team perspective, support people so that we can actually spend more time on that interaction and building the cultures of teams?
Shall I take that one?
Sure.
So for me, technology before pandemic was about efficiency of process and staying on top of the compliance actions and delivering a smooth experience for assignees, whether it's through relocation and tracking your shipping on an app, or pictures for immigration, or whatever it was all, let's make it a lot easier. For me now, it's swung to be more critical in-house on that technology piece. So yes, data reporting and all of that was obviously part of that experience, but the speed now of which, when I talk to my kind of colleagues, of being able to stay on top of the changes that are being issued from compliance, especially over the pandemic. It was literally day by day changes, people still needed to travel, people, there were still business elements that wherever possible, like our journalists, still had to go to breaking stories. Well, what do we do? How do we get there? What's the quarantine? What's the rules on immigration? The small thing of Brexit happened in the middle of the whole of the pandemic and everyone forgot that. Yeah. And actually staying on top of the compliance rules now, for me, is more of a focus on the technology, because rather than the fact that you can take a picture for your immigration application, it's almost slightly dropped down the list for me as a benefit of that. Because I definitely find the need and the ask of the business being incredibly pressured to say, we're going, so you need to tell me if this is happening, and I'm giving you 48 hours notice. Yep. Well, some of the governments don't even know their own rules at the moment, so for immigration or for different scenarios. So finding out the actual answer is, for me, half the battle.
Is it, in use of the sort of technology, is an expectation from the people that you're supporting that a lot of this is tech-enabled? Because, as Kat just said, the things are changing so fast that really what you're trying to do is, in a short period of time, provide an answer to somebody who is going. There's a business need for that. So, Claire, are you seeing that there's an expectation of using technology and in the hands of the person, and has there been a focus away from the user experience of that, making it simple just to make sure that we're managing the risk?
I think, interestingly, a lot of the times people think if you work in the tech sector that all of your processes and everything are just very, very streamlined and perfect, and not the case in the area I'm in. But I think, to answer your question, actually we're finding that whilst our employees are very technical in the roles they do, their interaction with us as mobility, or me, and immigration, even though we do have some set processes that are done via platforms, etc., because it's such a strange time at the moment coming out of COVID, there's all of these new potentially work-away policies. I still get the questions that come to me. People still, I think now more than ever in my experience, want almost a human connection. They need to know that the process is there underneath it all, but they still want to be like, oh, Claire, can I just check this? Can I just check this? So that's, I appreciate, not a sustainable solution long term, but it's this very weird interim at the moment where I think people are a bit nervous. They haven't, for 2-3 years, they've been told they can't move, they can't do anything, we're grounded. And now, as they're kind of taking the baby steps into doing that, they're kind of wanting a bit more of a personal touch. So that's kind of my focus right now, but also thinking longer term, how, when people get more comfortable, can we kind of make that a bit more, tech-enabled.
Yeah, and sort of following on that, you've got the candidate and the employee experience. Are you seeing people ask a lot more questions, right? They don't want to necessarily go onto an app or on a website, look at the documentation. They want that person that can really help them to understand, because for a lot of people, they haven't travelled for 2 or 3 years in some cases. So from your perspective, you see much change there in maybe the behaviour and how you support that?
Yeah, so I'm a very firm believer around technology not being a driver of experience, but an enabler of experience. And I think sometimes we do tend to think as technology as the be-all, end-all solutions, but actually, as you mentioned earlier, employees are after that human interaction, that human touch. So I'll give you an example of us at Klaviyo. We've recently established an office in Australia, and some of the questions that we've received from our people are very genuine, and the average age at our company is 27. So we have a lot of young people who are moving across from the US and the UK over to Australia. And the questions that you get, you think about it and you're like, well, if you put them in front of a computer or an email or any tech platform, it would be such a horrible experience for them, even though it may be the best platform, you've got the flashiest algorithm and everything. But from an experience perspective, I think that human touch is always key, in my opinion. So I think technology can help us in a number of ways, but it can help us as HR professionals to make our job easier. But I just don't think that it's something that essentially drives employee experience, or essentially is what people are looking for when they reach out to us for support, questions, and advice.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was talking to Luis, who's at one of the law firms here. He's talking about that human interaction, and I suppose we've missed a lot of that. And you can't just give people the tech. I mean, the tech, as you say, is the enabler. This is something that can help you ask the right questions, right? Can provide you some sort of information around that. But you know that you are in a role, and we're going to go on to it in a second, but you're in a role that is really critical to people's, not just their careers, but actually their lives, right? Because you're looking around people with families and people that need to move for certain things. What are the current challenges that you're seeing? Are there any things, you know, if you go back to March 2020, the world went into lockdown, nobody knew what was going, the shutters pretty much closed on a lot of companies. Everybody, you know, was in this sort of period, and then business had to go on, and they were looking like, we've got people in the wrong location, we can't get them back. I'm assuming that global mobility was one where you wanted that seat at the table. The seat at the table was there, and everybody wanted, you know, an immediate response. What are the current challenges you're seeing? What have you sort of seen in terms of the last 18 months? Are there different requirements from the business? Are they being a bit more patient in terms of let's build a strategy, let's have that, or is it still that immediacy, we need to fix this, we need to fix this now? Maybe I'll go to Claire first.
Yeah, I think for us, it's still a strange period because, again, I don't want to get too political, but from my job for immigration, for example, a challenge we're having at the moment is hiring Russian nationals into the UK. The UK government is saying we can hire, it's fine, which is a message I'm obviously sharing with my team. But the reality is we're seeing quite long delays, and secondary to that, in terms of physically relocating someone from that location, you have to kind of work out the best route to do that. So you kind of have these really granular challenges, which, you know, and to your point, you're not dealing with a product, you're dealing with a person, and I think that's what it, you know, I relocated myself and I moved to Hong Kong, and I kind of empathize massively with being like, I don't understand visas, I don't understand any of it. So you kind of always have to come back to that point. So that's kind of a personal type example of challenges we're seeing. But also I think as well, to your question around what it was like during the pandemic versus now, I think during the pandemic we saw a lot of governments, to your point, people were getting stuck. A lot of governments, for example, Singapore, were a lot more lenient on saying, look, there's people here that probably shouldn't be here, but it's fine. Now those kind of governments are closing up those, you know, leniences, and we're having to consider now, are we going to see more audits? Are we going to see more stringent regulations? So it's educating the business that behaviors that they may have been able to do during the pandemic, like, oh, it's fine, they can be there for a couple of months. Now, you know, it's almost like the horse has bolted and we're trying to bring it back in and educate. So it's a lot of education and spending time to keep that seat at the table. Like you said, the global mobility wasn't relevant during just COVID. It's relevant even more so now. So, yeah, I think it's just talking to the business a lot.
Yeah, maybe I'll pass to you, Z, but do you think there'll be like a moratorium on everything that happened before? We'll kind of let it slide a little bit. We've been lenient. Are you seeing that people they've had a lot of flexibility, right? And now you really need to go back to policy. And I think Khadija from Greco said yesterday, you kind of almost have to segment the population. These are the ones that we really need to support, and everybody else we need to say no for. Not because we don't have a solution, we just don't have the capability to kind of handle it. So are they some of the current challenges that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's sort of across the board. You know, how do you build for compliance while at the same time catering to the needs of our employees, and, you know, making sure that it's a great place to work. And I think it's sometimes hard to say no to people and push back, but at the same time, I think a lot of my role is to educate the business, particularly around compliance, around policies and processes, and the fact that no, you cannot establish a new entity, or you cannot move employees over in a week's time. You know, it just does not work like that. It's there's probably going to be a proper process that we need to follow, and it's more. It's sort of balancing that urgent need, but it's a bit hard in our industry because the SaaS landscape is very competitive. It's very fast-paced. Everything should have happened yesterday. So for me personally, it's always a struggle balancing the pace and the needs of the business and the urgency versus also making sure that we have the right processes set up at the right time with the right people as well on the ground across the board.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions. But one of the things I've seen is there's been a lot of pressure on your teams, right? Yourselves, and we're talking about, problems that didn't have to be solved before, and you being the visa and immigration and tax sort of experts within companies. What sort of support have your companies provided, and have you seen a change in their attitude to sort of investing? So there's probably things that you've been asking for a long time, but global mobility has kind of been over there. Everything's been working pretty well. We've kind of kept things going. The world has changed now. So in terms of you individually and your teams, how's that support? And are you getting the investment now, whether it's in people and training and support, or it's in the technologies and stuff? Maybe I'll go to Kat first.
I think it's something that's really ironic that when a global pandemic hits and nobody travels, all of the global mobility professionals I talk to, it's like it's 2 of the busiest years we've ever had. Medical insurance was not really working, and we had to do extra things in there, or people were getting stuck in countries where we didn't have the setup, and we had to make various steps, and all this stuff was coming out of the woodwork. I think it was great for us as a professional to highlight our reach, our knowledge, and the skills that we can contribute to the business. It shone the right light at the right time, and we were able to kind of show what we can do to help and partner with the business. In terms of investment and solutions, I think it highlights the limitations of our businesses, our industry and skills as well, where it is too fast and you can't say yes to everybody. And the platform, just from a geography perspective and the number of factors that are external to us, is something we can't control. It highlighted the limits to us, not as a team or a skill, but actually, the infrastructure around us was not set up, and still isn't set up to accommodate this amount of flexibility on an international scale. So I'm not entirely sure. Yes, there's investments with us as a team to get the right technology or more resource, and it doesn't help when we've got headlines that are like, oh, big tech companies are setting this all up. And I was like, yes, but I know they've recruited a team of 50 people just to do this one thing, and we're a team of 5. So it doesn't help the story. But other than, at the moment, just the human skills and manpower to do it is the only way I think that investments can help. But yeah, no, we've got a great team. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the people side of things, it's all about the people, right? We're talking about the values and cultural alignment, and we're under the spotlight here, but global mobility's been under the spotlight. In terms of how have your teams coped with that? Because it's quite a specialized area, right? And it's not just, having the legal understanding, but how do you actually put that into practice? How do you build the relationships that when you say no, it really is no, and people will sort of move on with that? So I don't know, Claire or Z, if you've got any sort of anecdotes or any sort of opinions about it, but I would just say, like, resiliency, everybody's had to be resilient, but your teams are under that spotlight, and how have you sort of managed that, and how have you sort of kept your teams together?
I think, well, for me, it's quite easy because I am my team, like it's just me.
Good job.
So it's good and bad for obvious reasons. But in terms of, I guess, how do I, like little old me, make sure that the voice for mobility and especially immigration is loud enough, I tend to, you have to just highlight the risks for example, for fintech, obviously we're quite high profile in the industry that we're in, and you mentioned stuff like audits, and you have to also be aware that a lot of people aren't necessarily, they don't know what they don't know, so they're very highly skilled in the software engineering world that they're doing or whatever sector, but actually in terms of what I do, I'm the specialist, so it's kind of breaking it down into kind of bite-sized, understandable chunks. You don't want to bore people, you don't want to lose people, but you want to get your point across. So I guess it kind of feeds into your prior question, but we're doing a complete mock audit of all of our immigration policies, all of our immigration records, because I think we're going to see we're going to see more of those things coming through now that, HMRC and the Home Office are kind of catching up. And I think secondary to that, as with most kind of startups or unicorns or whatever phase you're in as a new company, you've always got your eye on growth. And I think with growth has to come compliance. You have to always be prepared that someone at some stage is going to go through your records and make sure that you've got your house in order. And stuff like immigration, which if you break it down, that means people could stop working or have to leave the country, is quite fundamental to that. So I think for me, it's really kind of breaking it down and making sure you're vocal to the right people in a succinct manner.
Yeah, I think it's important, right? You've got to be able to sort of translate it, that they're going to be able to receive it. And it's not, you can't do that because there's a policy or you don't fit the profile of the individual you want to support. I'm going to hand to sort of Z for last question around the SaaS industry is, significant growth in lots of different areas. How have you found that? Because obviously, your teams are growing, but from a global mobility HR perspective, broader HR perspective, are you seeing the growth to keep up with the population and the kind of questions that they're asking you?
Yeah, so my background is within people ops and strategy, and I think one of the key or the fundamental part of my role is to build people infrastructure in the EMEA and APAC regions, because these are the regions where we are expanding and scaling into. So when it comes to scaling, while the business is also growing at the same time, it's important that the people team grows, and there's some investment made in hiring the right people, but also investing in the right mechanisms, technology, and tools to build for compliance. Because as you mentioned earlier, we have to be prepared for any unexpected events and making sure that our basic HR records, our policies and processes, they are up to date and correct. So I think what I've seen, and this has sort of been my observation across the industry, is that for SaaS businesses which are expanding and growing, they are making a significant investment within their people team, and certainly since 2020, I think most businesses have really realized and understood the importance of HR at a company, which I think is massively important, because no longer do we have to sell ourselves and sort of explain our value to the business, but they actually now understand, okay, what exactly is our role and how do we fit into the bigger picture in driving change and impacting business performance.
Yeah, I think it's important that the role is there, the spotlight is there, but you've had the capability and you've taken the opportunity as well to be integrated into the business. Like you solve problems. You're not sort of just sort of managing a process. We've got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to open up for if there are any questions.
I have a quick question. What role do you see outsourcing/partnerships playing in this sort of growth and transformation in the remote worker policies? Because as you sort of highlighted, you now almost need to be an expert in everything, because you don't know if the remote worker is going to come to you and say, hi, can I move to the Netherlands, or can I move to Singapore? So how do you think about and look at then using partners or outsourcing to help you tackle those sorts of things?
Sorry, Zia, it's a great question, because the thing is, if there wasn't any question, I was going to ask, how's your relationship changed with the service providers and the partners, right? Because you probably had to be a lot closer. So Z, what do you think?
Yeah, so for companies like ourselves, which aren't that big, I think the only reason why we're able to do all these wonderful things is through partnerships. And we have a fantastic relationships with our vendors and our partners. Tony being one of them, who's been helping us, navigate towards our entire process about how do we relocate our employees to Australia, what do we have to do in the UK to build for compliance and everything. So I think partnership is key for startups like ourselves, because we don't have all the answers and all the solutions, but what we do expect from partners is also to understand our business and our business needs, and the fact that we are not, as an example, in the tech space, we are not a structured, fully working mechanism. We are very flexible, we are very agile, and we are figuring things out. So we expect our partners to sort of jump in and work with us based on the journey that we're on at the moment.
I think
I was just going to say for us, again, echoing what you mentioned there, it's key for us. And to answer your question around like how does that translate into more mobile employees and more remote employees, like I said, we've recently brought on an employer of record, which is essentially a separate company that can act as an intermediary employer, allowing us to hire from locations we don't have an office. So almost that's the solution, but that's kind of one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is talking to the business, saying, look, this isn't something you need to think about it from an operations perspective. Can you, as the team, manage someone from X location that's working remotely? That's something my function can't do. I don't run the operations. I can bring the solution, but it's being aware that it's very much a partnership across the business as well.
I think, and we've just run out of time, but I'd love to end on that, because actually I think one of the things that we've talked about here is the importance of partners and the speed that we have to operate as a business is been critical. You can't necessarily always do it yourself. You can't necessarily build up the expertise. You can't support the multitude of requests that are coming through. There are various types of partners out there, and we talk about relocation companies and EORs and tax consultants and lawyers, etc. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll be here for most of the rest of the afternoon if you've got any questions. So thank you very much.